Welcome. My name's Paul Johnson. I'm the Vice-Chancellor. It's my very great pleasure to welcome Senator Bob Brown to the university today to speak to us. Now, Bob probably needs almost no introduction to all of you here. You will know that Bob is the leader of the Greens, and Bob has the rare distinction, I think, in Australian politics of having always been clear about his principles and always articulating those principles in the clearest manner, and doing that whether it's an election period or not, something that perhaps could be followed, an example could be followed by other politicians. We'd all be the better for that. Bob has a long lifetime commitment, I suppose, to issues of environmental protection and sustainability. He was director of the Wilderness Society, and back in the 1980s organised blockades of dam works on the Franklin River in Tasmania, for which he was arrested and imprisoned. When protesting against logging in Tasmania's Farmhouse Creek, he was assaulted and shot at. And after that, of course, anything that happens in Parliament House is almost trivial. He was a driving force in the formation of the Australian Greens in 1992. In 1996, he was elected to the Senate, re-elected in 2001 and 2007. He is here to talk to us about the Green Party, about conservation, and no doubt a little bit about the Australian election. After Bob has spoken, Professor Robert Manne is going to join Bob on stage to have a conversation with him about some of the issues that have been raised, and then there will be time for questions from the audience later. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bob Brown.
Thank you very much, Vice-Chancellor Paul, Professor Robert Dye, our Greens candidate for Batman, Alex Patel. Ladies and gentlemen all, thank you very much for having me to La Trobe and for giving me this opportunity to talk with you on this particular day, 10 days out from the great exercise of democracy on the 21st of August. I should say that the people who shot at me and a journalist and another person down at Farmhouse Creek, the journalist dropped straight into the mud. He was an army reservist and knew what to do. I just stood there and looked blank. Were actually arrested and subsequently brought before the courts. I was a Greens MP in the Tasmanian Parliament at the time, and they were both fined $200 for shooting on a Sunday. We're let off very lightly, though, I might tell you. And one of the great things about being in the world, one of the world's four oldest continuous democracies, is that we are able to vote, and that we do have democracy. The Greens Vice President, the Vice President of the Greens Party of Rwanda, was found beheaded a fortnight ago by a river in that country. And the Greens Party there of 600 trying to establish themselves in the run to that nation's elections were busted up by a group of thugs that came into an audience of 600 people just a few weeks before that. And it reminds me and all of us how fortunate we are to be able to exercise our free vote. And by the way, if you go to it's not a compulsory vote in Australia. If you go to the polling booth and you don't want to vote for any of them, you may put your ballot paper blank into the box. What's compulsory is going to the polling booth. But I'm here to tell you that there's a much better option than putting a blank into the ballot box, and that is to vote Green. Yesterday I was on the Darling Downs in Queensland, just outside Toowoomba. This is the headwaters of the Murray-Darling system, at a little place called Ackland, a village. The difficulty or the problem is the village is not there. It was 3 years ago, it's not now. 250 people and 50 houses. There's a hall, corrugated iron hall remaining, and a remnant baker shop and one house. And in that house lives Mr. Glenn Butel. And I had a cup of tea with Glenn yesterday morning because everybody else has been moved out, but he refuses to go. And what's happening to this little farming community town in one of the most productive foodlands in Australia in an age of global food insecurity, where every morning we wake up to thousands more mouths, human mouths to feed, but every morning we also wake up to less farmland available to produce food than ever before in human history, and in an age where the scientists are telling us this is going to be the hottest recorded year in human history. Certainly July was the hottest July in Hobart since records began in 1982, and I was in Darwin, ditto. It's the hottest dry in recorded history. Well, big coal is coming, and there's a coal pit 7 kilometres across which is going to swallow the whole of Ackland, including Glenn Butel, who refuses to move because his mum and dad, he's a man in his 50s now, worked to make it the garden town outside the garden city, and it won Tidiest Town Award in 1989, and down the road's a war memorial, which his parents fought for in a war memorial park, and Glenn refuses to go. I had a little talk about him, with him about what's happened. He came back after a short period away. The houses next to his were bulldozed, and the Banksias. And he brought out a picture of a koala getting through his back fence and gave me a card. And he showed me another picture of a koala in the main street. This is very rich koala country. Well, Glen, Ackland, the War Memorial Park, the koala habitat are all going into a big pit for a mining company. The shareholders, I'm told, are Soul Pattinson and Mitsubishi, to produce more coal to, if not be exported, to replace other coal for export in a Queensland which is the biggest coal-producing, exporting province on earth by a country mile, and where rich people backing the Abbott alternative government, like Clive Palmer, multi-billionaire in Queensland, you saw him perhaps a couple of rows back behind John Howard in the launch of the Liberals' campaign last weekend, want public money to subsidise more railways and ports to get more coal exported out of this country to be burned in Japan, China, India and wherever else, to put more, they don't want it, but this is the result, to put more greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere, to reduce the rainfall over southern Australia, including the whole of the Murray-Darling Basin. And Professor Garneau tells us, he's the advisor to the current Labor government, if we don't act on climate change, we'll knock the productivity of this great food basin of Australia, and fibre basin, provides the food we eat and the clothes we wear and so on, 90% this century. And I was saying to the press conference this morning, yes, Mr Abbott's going to put $750 million into getting X gigalitres back into the Murray, but it's not a very good investment if you refuse to act on climate change through the only really active component, which is a price on carbon, when scientists tell us by mid-century the current flow of the Murray will be reduced another 30% if we don't act on climate change. And back up in Ackland, where, to use the one word Glenn Butel uses about the destruction of the dreams of the people of Ackland and that village by the onrush of coal mining, horror, he told the media yesterday, we have not only open-cut coal mining, next coming to Felton, south of Toowoomba. The good farmers there are terrified that their stream with platypuses in it and their hill with two borer rings, Aboriginal borer rings on it, the whole lot's going in to an open-cut coal mine coming down the line for them. And they're not only going to get a coal mine, they're going to get a petrochemical works on it. And to be able to run the petrochemical works, you might know that southeast Queensland's been starved of water. They're going to bring water uphill from southeast Queensland to process the burning of fossil fuels. Now, the Darling Downs its future doesn't stop there. They want to take coal seam gas. That's methane. It's 20 more times potent in damaging the atmosphere and bringing the onrush of climate change than carbon dioxide. Well, the big corporations backed by Labor and the Coalition and the Nationals, which should be renamed the Mining Party. Coalition is, by the way, spelt C-O-A-L, Ishin. They want to put drill holes down. Well, they're doing it. There's a blockade at the moment up there with Drew Hutton, who founded the Greens in Queensland, there today. They want to put drill holes down through the aquifer upon which the farmlands depend into the coal underneath. It releases the pressure, up comes salty water. You've got to deal with the salt somehow. They don't know how, but they might. And releases methane, which is going to be piped to Gladstone, which is going to be piped to somewhere else to burn more fossil fuel energy. Well, they want to put in the next 20 to 30 years, listen to this, 40,000 drill holes down, each comprising a hectare of farmland. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't some prospect. This is what Gillard Labor and Abbott Coalition have ticked off on and will tick off on in their support for the coal and fossil fuel industry to proceed. Julia Gillard says that they won't have a carbon tax, but they will look in a phone book and find 150 consultants from around Australia to help decide whether there should be one if they can get community consensus, but not before 2 or 3 years down the line. In other words, not in the next period of government. Tony Abbott's much more explicit. He, with Barnaby Joyce and co, say, we won't ever apply a carbon price. Not ever. Dr. Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel Prize economist, was in this country and in this city in the last few weeks, said that economic responsibility requires a carbon price. And there's only one party in the National Parliament advocating that carbon price, and that's the Greens. And if you vote for the Coalition or you vote for Labor, you are voting for inaction and a determined failure to apply a carbon price. Now, I want to come to the CPRS, which was proposed by the Rudd government last year. They went to the Turnbull, then Liberals, and came up with an arrangement to double the flow of money from taxpayers, you, and therefore out of education, health, transport, housing, to the polluters. They call it compensation in a carbon trading scheme. $20 billion over the next 10 years. And what would that have achieved? Zero reduction in greenhouse gas emissions if it worked well. And people say, the media keeps saying, I don't get it from the public anymore, oh Bob, why didn't the Greens support that? Somebody said this morning, Tim Flannery said, that it's something's better than nothing. Well, I submit that something's worse than nothing. We went to Brian Walters, SC, here in Melbourne, who, by the way, will be the Greens candidate for the seat of Melbourne at the forthcoming state election, and got an opinion. And it's this: if we had locked into that system, not only would they get $20 billion over the next 10 years, but any change in the targets would have left the Commonwealth open to many more billions in compensation. And where does that come from? It comes from the taxpayers. And talking about tax, the Treasury came up with an idea that we should put a reasonable 40% tax on super profits from the depleting mineral resource base of Australia at a time of boom. Norway, population 5 million, has got a similar tax on oil and gas over there because they know it's going to run out, and that little country's got 350 billion in its sovereign fund for its future. Pretty good economic foresight. The Greens have proposed that in Australia, and both the big parties say no. And you know how the mining big corporate Xstrata, Rio Tinto and BHP rolled right over Canberra 2 months ago, changed the Prime Minister and rolled Julia Gillard back to essentially halving the tax. What could be worse than that? Well, Tony Abbott could be, because what he's saying is we won't raise $1 off the big mining companies' super profits. It's down to, by the way, only coal and iron ore. We Greens would at least add uranium to the super profits tax. But Tony Abbott and his leader in the Senate, Eric Abetz, will see to it that not $1 is raised from these multi-billion-dollar corporations. And by the way, the coal industry is 75% owned outside Australia. It repatriates tens of billions a year, but doesn't want to put 1 cent of super profits into this nation's future, and the big parties are compliant, although Julia Gillard will recoup some $11 billion per annum in budgets after 2014. Tony Abbott will get nothing. The Greens would apply the Treasury recommended tax, which would apply $20 billion a year to nation building. To do what? Well, for a starter, to get public education up to the standard that's enjoyed by the better private schools in this country in terms of spending, classroom sizes, teacher payments, the wherewithal for education. I met a young gentleman on this campus a moment ago who says he's just started a course for primary school education. I congratulate him. We need more men and women lining up for that great occupation in this country. But they need to be adequately funded. And if you're going to do that, you need to have the resources. And Tony Abbott says, I won't get a cent from the miners. I'll take his current plan, $3 to $5 billion off taxpayers to fund the big polluters to reduce doing what they're doing. What does this mean if we get a coalition government? Well, they've already said 12,000 people out of the public service. But there is going to be some very nasty cutbacks in spending on education, health. No prospect of the Greens' proposal for a Denticare system to get rid of the waiting list of 500,000 of our fellow citizens to see a dentist. Average waiting time, 27 months. As a doctor in the past, I know if you've got good dental health, you avoid bad physical health. An estimate is that the cost of not having adequate dental health care services for people in this country is $2.3 billion added on to health costs, because we simply don't provide first up primary dental health care. And I visited a dentist in suburban Sydney last week who said he gives $100,000 a year in free dental health care because there's so many people living below the affordability line in his particular area, they can't afford it. And he knows people, he looks after them, who won't go out because their teeth are so bad. Older people who don't want to visit their relatives or their friends. It's not just a cost in terms of health, it's a cost in terms of self-esteem and sociability. But neither of the big parties are going to fund Denticare because they're not going to properly tax the resource base of this country. And I might add, you won't find an editorial in the Australian chiding them over it. It'll be saying, oh, the Greens are coming to tax coal. That's a bad thing. Well, not only will we tax coal, we'll put that money into projects like Denticare. And what about high-speed rail between our cities? Spain's dedicated 56 billion euros. Valencia and Barcelona and Madrid are linked up already, taking 20% of people out of the planes, put them into trains because they're faster. High-speed rail would have people travelling from Melbourne to Sydney in 3 or so hours. China's had a train clocked at 510 kilometres an hour now. France has just outdone that with 575 kilometres an hour. Nobody killed in high-speed rail since the bullet trains were instituted in 1964. It's safe as well, clean, it's efficient, it's fast, it's cheap. If you must do so, you can use your mobile phone or your computer while you're going, or get up and have a walk, or go and have a meal. And look at the Australian countryside as you're zipping by. Well, both the big parties voted no to that when we brought it up in the Senate in inquiry just a couple of months ago. Amazing. We persisted. And in this election campaign, suddenly Anthony Albanese announced that they're going to have a $20 million inquiry into high-speed rail. And within 24 hours, the Liberals, who had denounced the plan in the Senate as a waste of taxpayers' money, quote unquote, suddenly were on side too. They'll have an inquiry too, which shows the power of having the Greens in the national parliament. And how about, just a couple of things, because I want to leave time for discourse, which is very, very important. Just a couple of other things. I got locked up at Farmhouse Creek, but the destruction of our forest continues. This afternoon, there's a critical Supreme Court ruling on the fate of brown mountain forests in East Gippsland. Trees out there dated at 600 years old. Rare and endangered species in the water, in the trees, in the air with those forests. We don't need to be cutting one more native forest in this country because we've got 2 million hectares of plantation, which is more than enough to meet all our wood need. And I congratulate the people who've taken that court case, and I hope to get there for the ruling. But why should it be left to the courts, ladies and gentlemen? Why is it that in this country, unlike New Zealand or Thailand, we haven't put an end to the destruction of these great ecosystems, which are the bailiwick? This is the International Year of Biodiversity. But no, and in Auckland, up there where the coal pit is, Glenn shows me a picture of a koala sitting in the main street taken in the last few weeks. Well, that's going into a coal pit too with the woodlands. And over here in East Gippsland, rare and endangered, the sooty owl, the orbost crayfish, the long-footed potoroo, all headed to extinction, and they want to log and burn it. And you talk about 5% or zero reduction in greenhouse gases under the big party's multi-billion-dollar payout scheme. If they just stopped logging our native forests and woodlands, it would reduce Australia's emission of greenhouse gases by 20% overnight. Now, is that too much to ask of our national government? We commit to working to that end as soon as possible. Another issue. Both the big parties, and Julia Gillard reiterated this the other night, are going to refuse to legislate to end discrimination in marriage. Is it too much for this country to catch up with Catholic Spain, with Canada, with South Africa, with just plain civilised thinking, to get rid of discrimination deliberate discrimination under the law? Cardinal Pell, if he wants to hang on to that, should stand for Parliament. But the majority of Australians want to end that discrimination, as they want death with dignity legislation, as they support the right to termination of pregnancy, which is written into the laws of this nation, as we support the right of people coming in boats to this country, for goodness sake, to be properly treated with compassion and legality under national laws. Well, we Greens stand on our record. We have intelligent, committed candidates. We are the one party with a vision for this nation's future in this campaign. And a vote for the Greens in both houses of Parliament is the premium vote running to that election on Saturday week. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a very exciting time. I've never been happier. It's because there's a philosophical integrity in what we're putting forward. This planet does have to intelligently change the direction we as a human community of 7 billion as of next year are living off a finite resource. And this is the wealthiest country on earth per capita in terms of natural resources. And we ought to be setting the standard for the rest of the world in compassion, in long-sightedness, in environmental guardianship, in intergenerational equity, in removing discrimination, and in economic prudence, which makes the economy our servant, not our master, and which properly gives the Parliament the job of intervening sensibly in response to the needs and the wishes of a modern and thoughtful community which wants Australia to lead in the 21st century instead of being locked in, as the big parties would have it, to a coal-oriented 20th century conscience. So, ladies and gentlemen, there it is. I'm enjoying this election campaign. I love having candidates like Alex standing in this election. I'm looking forward to the result after the 21st. I've been through a few disappointments as well as surprises. And I think the 21st of this month might turn up some very good surprises indeed, and they'll be green ones for the Australian people and for the next period of Parliament. Thank you very much.